So we're supposed to have a couple of people from the city here. That ain't happening.
What do you mean now? They have not sent me regrets. They'll only send me regrets. And not that. No.
So when we do this in the future, then we would include chat and that's as well in this committee.
Yeah, for sure.
Change legislation. Yeah. With some parts, yeah. We have a meeting with you. CCAE there. Yeah. No, now am I on? Yeah. Okay. So it is 10 o'clock and I'd like to call this meeting to order and recognize that we are meeting on the traditional territories of the Tishat and Tuputchis First Nations and that we respect that. And also this meeting is being Zoomed, right? Or being live streamed as well. Back to our regional district YouTube and on the regional district website. So in the boardroom here we have Director Cote from Sport Lake and Wendy Thompson and myself, John McNabb from Beaver Creek, and we also have Ben Nesson, our CAO. So and you can all see yourself online, so you don't have to introduce yourself. So I'd like to ask for an approval of the agenda. I've got a mover and a seconder. Is there anything that needs to be added? You don't want to stay here any longer than you have to? All right, then we'll move along. And all in favor? Anybody opposed? We're good. Thank you. And we have the minutes of the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee held on May 4th, 2022. We've got a mover and two seconders. So take whichever one you want there, Director Bodner. And any errors or omissions in those minutes? Nobody says there is. So all in favor? Adoption carried. And we have delegations. So we have Seth Wright, Manager Government Relations, BC Transit, presenting the 2021-2022 Annual Performance Summary. And Seth is away.
I'm right here.
Oh,
thank you.
All righty, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chair, and appreciate the opportunity to present to you directors. I am Seth Wright. I'm the Government Relations Manager here at BC Transit, and I have the privilege of serving the communities up and down Vancouver Island, where I've spent most of my life. And so it's a pleasure to meet you. I replaced Myrna Moore, who previously served in this role for many years. So there's some big shoes to fill. I am going to share my screen and I will present some slides about the annual performance summary, which is sort of our report card about how your transit system is doing for the last fiscal year. And then I have a few slides to give you an update on where we're at with some transit future service plan work that we wanted to get started in the next couple of months. And so right now, if you can see my screen, nod. If you see a PowerPoint, great. I'll just flip forward. So this is the first slide of the annual performance summary that we put out, which is a bunch of numbers. It looks at the last 2 fiscal years. So this is the fiscal year April 1st, 2020 to March 30th, 2021. And this one is the next fiscal year, which is the fiscal year that just concluded March 30th, 2022. And so I'm going to be focusing primarily on the actuals column. You can see that our finance department does a valiant effort of making conservative assumptions for where our budgets are going to land. And just at looking at the operating costs per passenger trip, we see that they sort of thought, because COVID was still hanging on, that the average cost was going to be just short of $70, and the average cost of the passenger trip was actually just around $41. So we're doing a lot better than we expected. We continue to climb out of the COVID, the shadow of this pandemic, and we're seeing overall some modest cost increases, but more than that, we're seeing growth to sort of pre-COVID ridership levels, and we see that reflected in here. I'm happy to answer any questions about this table, but I would really encourage people to look at this one. Over here, we have some tier averages, so that's for similar tier, what we call at BC Transit, tier 3 custom systems. Tier 3 systems are our small, like 1 to 5 bus transit systems across the province. And so you can see the tier average and then the variance from that tier average that we see in your system for the actuals from this fiscal year. And here's some year-over-year variance between the actuals and the budgets, which is comparing these 2 last fiscal years. I think I just went to a different screen, pardon me. And so this is a chart showing the last 5 fiscal years. And in the blue bar, you can see where ridership was at. And we have service hours shown as this dotted blue line. And so service hours was fairly stable for the first two years. There was an increase in service hours back in 2019-20, and it continued on. Obviously, in 2020, 2021, the pandemic hit and ridership was significantly impacted, but we maintained service levels. I'd really point out at this point that it's really critical that we maintain service on transit, both because transit provides that critical lifeline to folks in community to get their groceries and to get to the services that they need. But when we significantly cut service levels in transit, we see that it's a self-fulfilling death spiral of transit. Declining investment requires declining service levels. That reduction in service levels means there's less availability, and people will choose other means or set up their life differently so that they don't rely upon transit. But as we've seen in the pandemic, people that are isolated and don't have access to get to services or get to socializing, we've seen, I'm sure we all have friends and grandparents that have declined because they don't have the connection to the people and the friends that they need to have connection to, and transit is one of those important lifelines that we like to see. So we really appreciate that maintenance and service. This is a breakdown for the 21-22, so this last fiscal year. So this is the last 12 months up until March 2022. And we can see there's some variation through the year, and this, I think, mostly reflects where we've been with the pandemic. This similarly looks at the last 2 years in terms of rides. This adds wheelchair rides, so you can see the gray bars showing how many folks are using HandyDart on wheelchair as well. And similarly, you can see the effects of the pandemic. If you recall, the pandemic hit in March of 2020, and Bonnie Henry told us all to stay home in March. And so April, not a lot of people were going anywhere. It sort of felt like a prolonged snow day. But steadily ridership returned. We had some waves of the pandemic happen over the last 2 years, but overall ridership has been fairly consistently on the upswing. There is a confusing aspect to these 2 charts on these pages. So I'd point out that this is a 500 rides per month, and this is 1,000 rides per month on this top chart. And on the bottom chart, this is 500, this is 1,000, this is 1,500, and this is 2,000. So in the 21-22 fiscal year, we've done significantly better than the 2021 fiscal year. And we continue to see ridership growth. So we're really on the doing much better. And then I added in this this confusing line chart to give you an overall sense of ridership over the last 5 years. So this goes back to April 2018, and 2018 is this rusty red line. And you can see that ridership sort of varies around 12 to 1,400 or 1,500 rides per month, depending on the month of the year. We see the gray line being 2020 when the pandemic struck and ridership just plummeted. We see 2021, this darker blue line where ridership was generally on a fairly consistent positive trajectory, and then this baby blue line where we see in 2022 ridership has returned pretty much exactly to a pre-pandemic normal. And so now I also wanted to speak a little bit about the Transit Future Service Plan, which our planning team is preparing right now some terms of reference to work on. The last service review was done in 2012. There was a major restructure in 2012, and there was a post-implementation review in 2013. Holiday service was added to Port Alberni Transit in 2014, and additional handy dart service, as I mentioned earlier, was added in 2019. So there's been a feasibility study which involved 2 phases. The first phase was looking at possible service options for electoral areas and First Nations surrounding Port Alberni. So I'm sure you folks have been familiar with that work. And phase 2 was exploring options for implementing service to Sprott Lake. There's some key considerations that we need to address as part of this Transit Future Service Plan. One, the operations facility is at or approaching capacity. The Redford Exchange is at capacity. The system currently operates as a pulse system, which means that all the buses come to the center at the same time and enable people to get off one bus and get onto another bus, and they all meet up. And the drivers usually have a break for a couple minutes and go to the washroom during this time and can get off onto another bus. There is comprehensive engagement required for introduction of service to electoral areas and First Nations. So we've sort of said, okay, this because we need to reach out to rural communities and to First Nations, we need to give ourselves a little bit of extra time on that front to do that engagement effectively. The purpose of this work is to identify improvements to transit service and outline the path to implement those improvements. So we want to have a bit of a priority and a plan to achieve the growth of the transit system going forward. And we want to focus on changes to be made in the short to medium term and look at some things for the long term, but just sketch them out at a high level and not get into too much detail with the long term. So these are the objectives for the plan. I won't go into these in any detail, but they're fairly straightforward, and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Sorry, I see if I can get back to the slide. Just have one timeline I wanted to present, which is here is the draft timeline for this planning process. The planners would do some community context review and look at what we have right now, where the density is in the communities and where people live and where people need to get to, really a desk exercise. And then they would do a second part of this desk exercise of exploring the current system, understanding the way it's built and what might be opportunities. And then they would look at doing some stakeholder engagement, identifying some key stakeholders, First Nations communities, and that sort of thing to share some preliminary ideas and collect some information, identify some options. With those options, go to public engagement in the spring, summer of 2023. We'd come back with results of that engagement to local government, and we'd seek approval of a plan at that time and look to wrap this up by fall of 2023. So we're looking at a 1-year timeline, basically. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any questions.
Okay, so must have like a ton of questions. There we go, a question. Director.
Thank you.
You're-
Okay.
You're Director Minions, you know that, right?
Oh, no, I'm not.
Yes, that's who you are.
I'm not.
She's got her name tag as Director Minions, but she in fact is Director Cote.
Oh, yes. So I have a couple of questions. We have a report in our board package for this afternoon with pretty much what you've presented today. A couple of things. There's no information on the ridership for Sprout Lake, which I'd really like to find out what that is, because talking about a trip is $61.29 in 2021 and up to $40.71 a trip, and going down. It was going down, but that doesn't really equate out to when budget time comes around and the services delivered to the regional areas by assessment based. So in the past, 1 year I only had, I believe it was 11 trips, and that trip is one way. And it was almost $800 a trip for our assessment. So, and that's just our portion, not the subsidized portion. So I'd really like to get a breakdown on that. So what the ridership is for Sprout Lake, if it's increasing or decreasing, if it's what it was improved after identifying that there was only 11 rides that 1 year. So do you have those numbers with you, or can we get them? Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, thank you for the question. I don't have it at my fingertips, unfortunately, at this moment. I just messaged someone and asked if I have it. If I can get those numbers, I can certainly provide them to staff if I'm not able to get that information in the next couple minutes.
Sorry, Director Cote again.
Thank you. Another question. In the report, it talks about estimated staff time to support the expansion. I'm not sure if you have that information. It's estimated staff time will be necessary to support this expansion. Communications, 4 hours, community service, 6 hours, and finance, 4 hours. Is that per month or per week, or what is that? Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, I can answer this one, and I'm just not sure if you want me to answer this as a part of the RFD presentation later in the meeting.
Go ahead. We got continuity here. We'll go with it.
Yeah, this is just the total amount of staff time for the expansion. It isn't per month, it's just total.
Okay. Anybody else with questions? Okay. Daniel's got a question.
Just putting it out there as well. I realize that we see an increase in ridership starting in February, and I think part of that is a return to the quote unquote normal. Any comments in terms of around the province, what we're seeing, like, because this also coincides with huge cost of living increases, fuel increases, and of course the transit system now becomes perhaps a way for many families to help control the rising household costs. Are there any estimates there, or are there any links that BC Transit is looking at, and perhaps any guidance that we should start considering in terms of incentives or ways that we can help people perhaps get onto transit as a way of helping to control the rising costs of living?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, through the chair, thank you for the question. And I think that there's a few things I could say about this. One thing I would say is what we see in terms of recovery really varies from community to community, and there's a desire as I think a human and certainly myself as a data nerd to sort of want to find out what the themes and what the linkages are. One linkage that I have noticed is in smaller, more affordable communities like the Alberni Valley, where the cost of living has only more recently sort of really impacted the community. I think there's places like Victoria and Vancouver that long ago were costed out for a lot of folks. But historically, I think places like the Alberni Valley and many small communities across the province have seen transit less impacted through the pandemic, because so much of the transit ridership are people that use transit to do basic life functions like get your groceries and go to the doctor, and some of those things have not been able to be achieved without transit. In larger communities, and certainly in our big systems, we see that transit ridership has been slower to recover, where people are going to work less and maybe working from home. Like, I don't know, I'm in my spare bedroom still working here, and so that's appealing to a lot of folks. So certainly ridership has been slower to recover, but we are working on various strategies and certainly have a number of strategies I think that will be incorporated into the transit future service planning process and the engagement on how transit can better support people in managing their cost of living. Sometimes your question gets considered and forwarded onto our marketing department, and I've certainly advocated to our marketing department that we look at what opportunities there are to engage the conversation around transit as an alternative to having a second car in communities where transit service is good. And so if you live certainly in the city of Port Alberni, there's some good transit service to get around. And through this process, hopefully we can expand some transit service into some of the surrounding areas and enhance that and provide a feasible opportunity for people to get around.
Alrighty. You happy? Oh, another question.
So will there be a review of the transit for the rural areas? There was one for Sprout Lake and with a proposal, but was rejected. So to asking BC Transit to actually reconsider transit system to the rural areas such as Cherry Creek and Beaver Creek.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these questions have been flagged by our planning team as being part of the consideration for this transit future service plan. So we would like to include evaluation of transit service to rural areas as part of this comprehensive planning exercise. So I think we've done some piecemeal exercises in the last few years, and we'd like to do a much more comprehensive engagement, both initially with stakeholders as I outlined in that timeline, and then with the general public in both in the city of Port Alberni and then in the rural communities throughout the regional district, or at least throughout the Alberni Valley.
Okay, anybody else? I've got two questions that I would like to ask. One of them is, I heard within the last month that there was issues with Alberni Valley Custom Transit not being able to supply rides at certain times. And I see by those charts that we are below the threshold of both rides and capability. So we did have the buses in place and the system in place to handle the volumes that were previously recorded as more than what they are today. I'm just wondering why that is, what that recovery is going to look like as far as the system's concerned. I'll let you go with that one first, and then I'll go on to the next one.
Sure. I'm not immediately aware of what the level of missed service is or sort of unable to deliver service. So I think that sometimes, especially as we've recovered from the pandemic, something we've seen is that people weren't traveling for a year and a half, and then they call up Andy Dart and say, I want to go to to my social club again. My social club is opening, or the senior center is opening, or this activity I'd like to go to is happening again, and so I'd like to book that. And there's availability, there's maybe not available during that very popular time of day, and so there may be people everyone wants to go travel at the exact same time of day, and so that might be what's happening with that. But I can certainly look into it and get back to you and provide some information to staff on what the sort of capacity constraints that you're speaking to are the results of.
Great, thanks. So the other question is a bit of a philosophical one attached to my duties as climate change person. I wonder if the transit has got a calculation that indicates the emissions per ride and the overall emissions per ride. I realize that a lot of the buses are alternate fuel or zero emission engines or motors, but then there's still all of the brake dust and the tire dust and other things that are entering in. So I wonder if it's something that transit has actually investigated and quantified.
Sure, thank you. We do have some staff in environmental management and greenhouse gas calculation, sort of starting off some work on this front, and I've had the pleasure of having some conversations about these topics with them. They're very cautious of the complexity of how we calculate these. We have a few gas buses, and in a system like this, how you calculate some of those numbers is, perhaps I'm overcomplicating the question, but there's generally assumptions about when someone rides a bus. If you have more than 3 or 4 people on the bus, it's better than those 3 or 4 people using their private automobile. So we tend to look at that threshold as a valuable threshold for greenhouse gas emissions, but we haven't published a lot of information or data on how we're doing in communities, because sometimes we're doing better than that and sometimes we're doing worse, and we'd like to have a sense of confidence in our data before we go patting ourselves on the back or celebrating that. In the interim, what we are focusing lots of energy on is moving towards a low carbon fleet program and a battery electric bus program, which we have a much bigger team of people that are working on looking at where systems are across the province where we could develop infrastructure to support battery electric buses. Whereas gasoline or diesel bus, you can just go to the gas station and fuel up. A battery electric bus needs a whole charging infrastructure. Sometimes that requires a substation at our bigger yards. In our smaller yard, that can require a more modest piece of BC Hydro infrastructure. All of those yards and BC Hydro infrastructure requires investment of fairly significant capital, and so we're doing that work and identifying where the first few systems for implementation of battery electric bus might be. This work, as part of BC Transit's mandate from the province, is really one of the most significant in terms of the entire provincial apparatus on moving towards its Clean BC targets and the province's climate change priorities by 2040 in particular.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm less interested at this point in greenhouse emission. I'm more interested in ppms. The particulate emission of large vehicles is significant, and I think it's something that the bus system needs to recognize. Even different types of tires make a difference in ppms. So the question basically stems from, if you look at the internal system of BC Transit around the Alberni Valley, the Port Alberni system, you see that the bus, a large bus, generally carries, one goes by our business every 10 minutes. And if there's 5 people on that large bus, it's unusual. So that's kind of, I'm wondering, if that calculation exists somewhere in the system, the emissions per ride in the system. So I think it's something that if it isn't there, it needs to be there, because changing scheduling could increase the number of people on the bus and reduce the emissions. So that's after that. And so anybody else? Oh, Director Cote.
Thank you. So a question about education and advertising. So I'm sure that there will be some kind of education or advertisement if you change the routes. But just to increase the ridership and let people even know, I know that my area, there was discussion around from the community association around putting something in the newsletter regarding the handy dart availability, the number to call, because people weren't aware that they could actually call and get a handy dart. So wondered if you have a plan for any kind of education or advertising for the future. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Through the chair. As part of the Transit Future Service Plan, so as part of this planning engagement exercise, there will be an engagement plan component to it that will identify how we engage with the community, and certainly additional effort will be put into how we engage with the community in rural areas and in those First Nations communities. Subsequent, our marketing team is engaged heavily on when we do make service changes and route changes to carry out advertising. And we typically do advertising in a multifaceted approach. So we do a lot of social media. We use Facebook and Twitter, I think, principally. When we do service changes, we put posters on the buses, so the people that ride the buses also see posters notifying them that there's service changes and what the service changes are. We obviously update the rider's guide, and so we have rider's guide. We have online information. Increasingly, we have transit apps that folks use to get transit information. And we also do the sort of more conventional radio and print advertising. So we put a few ads in the local paper, and we do some radio ads typically when we introduce service changes to ensure that everyone's aware of those service changes. So we don't necessarily do advertising for the service when it simply exists, but when we do introduce service changes, we always promote it and make a point of ensuring that people in the community are aware.
Okay. Alrighty. Anybody else? We thank you for your presentation. Hopefully your shoes aren't burning too bad as we put them to the fire, but thank you for your answers, and hopefully some of the information that we've asked for will come forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ganley.
Alrighty, on to the next thing. So we have requested for a decision regarding the Alberni Valley landfill renaming. And I'm not, Jenny will be taking this. Her and I have discussed this several times and come up with many different options. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And I look forward to hearing more suggestions potentially on the landfill renaming. So this project started because we are shifting to organics diversion, and because the landfill has evolved so much from being a place where garbage goes in the ground to a place where we really are focusing on diverting materials, recycling as many streams as we can, diverting lots of material, as well as now the organics implementation. So with that, we've been looking for a better name to call the Alberni Valley Landfill. Over the last year, we've brought this to the committee a couple times. We have reached out to our local First Nations, and most recently we did a campaign with the schools. We did the campaign in March and we aligned it with Earth Day. We had an excellent package that's attached in the agenda. It also was a really good tool, we feel, to engage with the kids and talk about waste and what is this and how do we divert, and really is getting incorporated in our overall education program. We received some very creative submissions for the landfill name, which I would like to read out. So the kids have suggested a few names. One is Green Planet Recycling, Alberni Recycling and Composting, Triple R Recycling Depot, Clean It, Green It Recycling Center, From the Ground Up Recycling, Wasteland, and Garbage World. All very creative and excellent solutions from children. And we appreciate the effort. And we really think that that process was invaluable. We're going to continue to use some of the materials made and modify them from year to year as we work through the school program. However, when we really consider the intent of naming the landfill, we want to make sure that it is both functional and then also aligns with the idea of diverting materials. So from a staff perspective, we actually thought, you know, maybe we should consider the Sort and Go program. We've been promoting it. It's been very successful in the community. People understand the idea of sorting and diverting things, and whether they're doing that at the curb or at the landfill. We're suggesting that that actually might align with what the intent for renaming the landfill is. We do have some other ideas that we have come up with if the committee would like to consider, but I think that the resolution that we put before you is to consider proposing that we do the name change to the Sort and Go Center. And we would love to hear from you and your thoughts on that or other suggestions if you have them.
Okay. So anybody, the one question I have with regards to this name is, what about copyright infringement?
You know, we've done this branding exercise with our communication consultants when we started the organics diversion program. I think as a local government, I don't believe anyone else is using the Sort and Go, and that was one of the considerations when we decided to use it and create our app and do all of those things. But it is something that I did not consider, and we can double check and see if someone has already copywritten that as a final check if the resolution is passed before we take it to the board.
Okay, anybody else got input on this? Director Bodner.
Yes, to the chair, to Jenny, I think this is a great name, Sort and Go Center. And also for the people who may be grumbling about this too, the name itself is you keep getting that name, Sort and Go, Sort and Go. So somewhere along the line, it may reverberate to say, yeah, this, you know, this is what we do. So just saying that.
All right, Director Cote.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. This is a really good exercise in including the youth of our community. I really like the names that they provided. And I'm sure there were many that came forward. All of these are really good names. I like the Sort and Go Center part, but could we not incorporate part of the other naming to it too? So it is a Sort and Go Center, but couldn't it be something like the Green Planets Recycling Sort and Go Center, or the Alberni Recycling and Composting Sort and Go Center? So, you know, I know it makes the name longer, but a lot of buildings have a name, but then what it is underneath. So just wondering if we could consider that at all. Thanks.
The committee can consider and suggest whatever name they would like. We really are, from a staff perspective, we think keeping it pretty concise. We could put a subtitle on signage there if we wanted to. But I think that there is some benefit in keeping it relatively simple and consistent with the brand. But please feel free, if that is the will of the committee, we are happy to hear it.
Thank you. So would the name also include the Alberni Clay Plot Regional District Sort and Go Center then? Because it doesn't really, Sort and Go could be anywhere or any.
This is Alberni Valley. Isn't it?
No.
Yeah.
for clarity through the chair, so because the name is really two components, one is the locational geographic name and one is the functional name, we are keeping the Alberni Valley consistent with what it is already and just looking to change the word landfill. And so it will be Alberni Valley, Sort and Go Center, or Alberni Valley functional name.
So I agree that it might not be as organic as I'd like to see, just simply, but some sort of a subtitle there with organics diversion, some other word that might be fine. If you get the name too long, the acronym might spell something completely different than we want to see. So I think it's generally a good idea. I have Director Beckett and Director Shannon.
Thank you, Chair. I like the name. I think it's a good branding, and I also want to point out that we and staff have spent an awful lot of time and energy on this, and it is important, I think, that we resolve this and move on to other important matters.
As in get her done. Director Shannon next.
Thank you. I agree. I like the name how it is. I think it's consistent with the branding and all the education that's gone on this past year or so with the Sort and Go work that the regional district's been doing. So I'm happy with how it is. And while we're talking about the landfill, I just have a quick comment for Jenny, just because otherwise I'm going to lose it and forget about it. And we can follow up with this later. But at the landfill, we take vegetable oil for recycling, and there's a big tub there. My question is it possible, or do other landfills have, like, if you have your jug of dirty oil and you dump it in, you now have a dirty oil jug that you have to take home to wash to then put in the appropriate recycling spot. Is it possible to have like a little mini wash station or something there for ease of use of our people that are using it when they're sorting and going at the landfill? Nothing we have to discuss now, but when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, that came to mind.
We'll follow up with you directly on that.
Alrighty, consistent with Director Beckett. Did you have another question? Did I miss it? We'll ask for a motion here. Somebody, Director Shannon and Director Beckett. Any other comments on this? I'm sure we don't need to direct staff about the copyright infringement, but they will. And all in favor? Anybody opposed? We all like the name. That's the way we're going. Thank you. Thank you for all the time, Jenny and crew. I know it wasn't the easiest process. It's kind of like naming a new child. Okay, on to the next thing. This is Paulo, I think, or is it Jenny again?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be speaking to this. Paulo has joined us. He's taken time off of his holidays, but he's hotspotting and we're not certain about his security of connection. So I'll speak on his behalf, but if there's questions I can't answer, he's here as well. So we're looking to increase the base rate of the tipping fee rate. So that's generally for municipal solid waste. Now, we originally, our last increase was in 2019. And at that time, the rate was $120 a ton. We raised the rate to 130. One of the key driving factors there was to stay consistent with our neighbors. And when we made that change, we did see a drop in the garbage that was coming in through the commercial stream. So we know that if we don't keep up with our neighbors, what we will see is the commercial companies who do routes in Nanaimo as well as in Port Alberni, they will make the choice to come to the lowest cost landfill. We have looked at other ways to enforce this and make sure that out of town garbage tipping doesn't happen, but really the most efficient and effective way to do that is just to have it as a financial disincentive. So that is one of the key components why we're looking to adjust the rate again. So we're looking to increase this from 130 to 140. This is consistent with both the Regional District of Nanaimo and the Comox Valley Regional District. Other rates can be higher, Cowichan Valley is. But we also have to consider that we do have costs that we need to recover. So this rate also helps us to generate revenue to pay for things. We have some costs that are going to be coming. Our closure and post-closure monitoring. We recently completed the DOCP, which is the Design, Operating, and Closure Plan. We've updated that, so we know that our cost estimates that we have to be putting away are higher. That's a direct cost. We're seeing fuel price increases, and that is being relayed back to us through our operating contract. We know that we're probably likely to see other inflation impacts as we go out and address with our contracts. Anytime we're renewing one, we're going to see increased costs. We also foresee costs associated with doing securing of our landfill long-term tenure. So we know that's a cost that is coming, as well as our solid waste management plan update. So raising this tipping fee will generate more revenue for us to cover the cost to operate solid waste, meet our regulation requirements and all of those. This increase is not for the bag rates. So we are going to be coming back to the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Committee in the fall, late fall. It's either late November, early December, with a report that will look at those bag rates, which are currently the $3 per bag with a $6 minimum. So we're working on basically fleshing out some good options for the committee to consider. So this really just looks at the base rate that impacts commercial haulers, as well as like any company that's going around collecting within the electoral areas, as well as commercial businesses, and then the city of Port Alberni garbage rate. So with the impact to the city, the good news for the city is they've reduced their garbage production over the last year by 44%, which is excellent. So they are seeing their garbage rates reduce. However, pardon me, when they were doing their projections for costing, as they went into 3-stream, we anticipated that there would be a drop and that there would be a cost savings. They still have to pay for the organics. And in fact, they're seeing not just the material that would have like food waste that's no longer getting landfilled and they're paying the organics rate for that. But there's also a majority, like quite a bit of yard waste that wasn't getting collected before that is coming in through the system. So the city is paying for that. So on whole, they are seeing significant tipping fees. We also do not want to, it's sort of the opposite thing that we want to do for the city. They've invested a ton of energy and time and money in trucks and doing this 3-stream program. They have been really great at it. The city has done an amazing job, and all of the residents have been we're so happy and excited. And we have a lot of details in the report at the end of the agenda to talk about the success that we've seen with this program. So the big drawback with increasing our tipping fees is the impact that we would see on the city and city residents. So we've looked at an opportunity to address that specifically. Right now, when the city trucks collect, they collect recycling and organics, or organics and garbage, rotating. The recycling that comes into the landfill, we compile in a 40-yard bin and we take it to its near Parksville. So those costs associated with that, we have an agreement with the city and we bill them back for those costs. So we have a mechanism that we can reduce the amount that we charge them to offset this tipping fee increase. And so we've run the numbers. We think it'll be between $15,000 and $20,000 increase if we increase the tipping fees. And so we're proposing that at the same time that we increase tipping fees, we adjust the amount that we invoice them monthly to haul recycling by reducing those monthly invoices by about the same amount. I think that is the essence of the content of the report. So we have a bylaw attached that recommends the adoption of the bylaw, as well as doing an amendment to the agreement with the city to modify the amount that we charge them so that there's no net impact on them. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, so Director Wagner and Director Cote.
Thank you to the chair. When I was reading all the information there, something that popped into my head was, or that I was reading, said that self-haul organics was going to be charged $5 minimum. So when you say self-haul, you're talking about the people who are not doing their, do not have sort and go out in the electoral areas?
Through the chair, that's correct. We don't have we have a rate of $110 for organics, and that's per ton that we charge people. So it's difficult with our scale technology because if you're hauling less than, I can't remember if it's 10 kilograms, the scale is no longer accurate. It just, because a truck weighs so much and then whatever material is in it, it offloads that. The difference is minuscule and it becomes sort of inaccurate at those very small volumes. So for all of our tipping fees, we also have a minimum rate so that we're not charging people 30 cents or 50 cents on a volume that we can't accurately say is the amount. So we usually set a minimum rate. And then that's one of the things that we don't have in our bylaw right now is a minimum rate for organic. So when we originally made the update, we only set $110 per ton. So we need to institute a minimum rate to address that issue. And then that allows for people to pay a minimum rate, whether they're hauling whatever the small volume is. So I hope so.
Okay, it just seems I can bring 6 bags, I can bring 2 bags of garbage for $6, or I can bring my organics, which is going to be minimal amount because you don't want it to smell, for $5. Is that correct?
That is correct. There is also, maybe Paulo, I've got a question for you on this one, if you're here. I think there is still free, is Earthline and Sea, what are they offering for services off of Tebow?
Off of Tebow, where they're located, they're offering services at $5, either $5 or $5.50 per drop off for customers. So the fee that you're seeing here is also designed to not undercut that specific business as well. It's kind of like for like, as it were.
Okay. Just wanted to ask, thank you for clarifying that. Another question I have very quickly. Once our garbage goes to Parksville, what happens to it after that?
So the recycling, only the recycling goes to Parksville. It is then consolidated and baled, and then it goes to the mainland where it goes to a sorting facility. So in the last 2 years, we've changed the way we do residential recycling in BC. Everything stays within BC. At that point, it gets split out and separated into the specific stream. The plastics, I believe, get handled currently at Merlin's Plastic in Vancouver. The cardboard is baled, and I think that still stays within North America. Metal within North America. A lot of it still, I think, does go to the southern states, but that is the path of recycling.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, I've got Director Cote. We got anybody else in the back? Director Shannon.
Thank you. Question to the chair, to Jenny. So we're talking about reducing the city cost by 12. What was it? Where was it? By $1,700 a month. So are we subsidizing that with the rest of the regional district? First question.
Through the chair, we believe that the impact on the city will be approximately equal to that. So if we raise the rate from 130 to 140, based on our projected volume that they will produce over the next year, they're going to end up paying between 15 and 20, but probably $20,000 additional. So then we're trying to subtract that amount from what they pay for us to do the recycling so that it will have zero net impact on them. It will be as though the city has not seen an increase in their tipping fees. They are paying for the $110 for all of the organics and yard waste that comes in. And I would like to note that one other thing that I'm very conscientious of is that although, and I think at the end of the report, it's about 1,300 tons of organics was diverted from landfill, I think there's an additional 700 tons that we wouldn't have expected that is normally yard waste. So that's material that people have been historically dumping at the end of the road or over a ravine. A lot of it is that, fire smart wood stuff in the woods. So there's an additional service kind of that the city has picked up that is more above and beyond what they're just doing to divert from the landfill. The other thing is that with this diversion, we've extended the life of our landfill, and we think it's at least 5 years with the success that they've seen. Now, for us, every year that we don't have that we get out of the landfill means that we delay closure and post-closure. So we are seeing a direct benefit from the ACRD as a landfill operator from them diverting this material into organics, and we do charge them for that material. But the less that is waste, the more we win. So for those reasons, we aren't calling it a subsidy. We're just more looking at it as though we don't want to penalize them with an increase in tipping fees associated with the success they've seen on diversion.
Thank you. So that long answer is telling me that we're subsidizing the city from the regional areas, which I'm not in favor of. I don't see any incentive for the rural areas that are doing the same thing of diverting organics and other waste from the landfill. We are doing that. You didn't mention anything about the measurements there. I know people who regularly compost and divert all of the garbage. Yet it seems that their interpretation is that they're being penalized now for taking waste to the landfill, paying $5 when you mentioned maybe 50 cents. That's a huge increase. And the 2-bag minimum, I still continue to hear that, and we don't seem to be talking about that at all. So subsidizing the city at this point is really not favorable, I think, to the members of my community. Thank you.
If I may make one more note, because I think this is important information that we need to be able to communicate out to the public as well. So you raised excellent points. One of the things that is so when we create a rate like this, which is that organics is $110, which is less, and waste is now going up, which is $140, it incentivizes this diversion. And so we have seen the city be very successful with the curbside program. We haven't seen in the rest of the garbage data that we measure, we haven't seen that same level of increased diversion. Forever, people, we just haven't seen a significant shift in the way. But I think creating this incentivized system where people can pay less to drop off organics, recycling has no charge, and garbage continues to be more expensive will help us continue to increase diversion rates.
Okay, just before Director Shannon, I've got Daniel.
I just wanted to add one thing in the staff discussions, and I appreciate Jenny's answers, but in the staff discussions, the reason why we created this adjustment for the city is that the concern is quite the other way, is that with reduction and the net cost of what the impacts would be without that reduction coming from the city, our concern is that the city would actually be subsidizing the rest of the region, which is what we're trying to avoid by introducing this adjustment. So I'm less concerned about the inverse because we don't see the evidence for that right now. But the other way around with the increase is that the lion's share of the increase would be borne through the city in spite of their existing investment, which has already taken place. Now that's in today's view, but I think it's important to reiterate that aspect and to make sure that we're not running a message the other way, because I don't think the evidence supports that.
Director Shannon.
Thank you. I guess I had thoughts similar to Director Cote's, because I'm struggling here with if the city gets a break with some of these fees because of the good job that they're doing, how that's impacting like the small businesses that are haulers for the electoral areas and self-haulers, because it's perceived penalty. And I mean, when we talk about this stuff, it's like, why would you give the city a break? And then why would I still have to pay more for the service I'm doing? Because if there's other haulers that are doing it privately, and they're seeing these increases, that's eventually going to go down to the users. And yeah, same kind of idea. Like I said, when I read this, I really struggled with that because I don't want the inequality or the perceived inequality for rural versus city in what we're doing here.
through the chair, it's interesting because we don't run a collection service for Three Stream in the regional area. The way we can influence private haulers in setting up Three Stream programs is through financial incentives. So if I was a private hauler and I'm paying X to tip, and I thought, oh, if I can convince my customers to, divert their organics into another container that I can take and pay less for, then I'm going to win, they're going to win, less rate, less fees to pass along. So as the landfill owner and the person who sets the fees, we set up an incentivized system that hopefully encourages business to then offer those services to the individual and the in the electoral areas. So we're hoping that, again, with the $110 for the organics comparative to $130, $140 for waste, it will continue to encourage those systems to naturally set themselves up. And if people don't wish to use those services, then they themselves can set up their own diversion to, again, reduce their own costs. It is within their control on how much they will pay based on how much waste they create.
Okay, Director Cote.
Thank you. How will this affect the West Coast? So Bamfield hauls their garbage too.
Currently, we pay a contractor to pick up the garbage in Bamfield, and they pay the tipping fees. So they will see an increase in their tipping fees, which will be passed along to the regional district. So that will see a minor increase. I could probably run the numbers to see how much it'll be, but it's going to be pretty small, considering that the impact on the city is 20,000. The volumes in Bamfield are significantly less. So we could run the analysis on that to see how much the waste hauler will see and therefore is likely to increase our contract. But right now, I think we're in a 3-year contract, so we wouldn't see the impacts of that until it went out for competition again.
Thank you. So could we not do like this all or nothing? I think that we all deserve a break for our communities for doing the Three Stream. We're all doing it to some degree. So I think we should all deserve a break, or I don't really like to see the rural areas carrying the weight here. Thanks.
Okay, I've got Director Jack, and I'm kind of thinking that Director Minions is probably sitting there waiting to put her hand up too.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree entirely with the concept that the electoral areas are somehow involved in Three Stream. From what I understand, they mostly rejected Three Stream. There's no pickup. And so this is the way that we would influence people actually using Three Stream, because I think that people who live in electoral areas are treating solid waste as just solid waste, all in one thing. And so we want to give incentives. We want to make them sort their garbage into organics and recycling. And so the city of Port Alberni has already done that. So they are actually doing the work of sorting garbage as in an organized way, which means that they're actually doing more than the rest of the regional district when it comes to solid waste. And so I think I don't think we can do all or nothing until we have full Three Stream pickup going on in the rest of the electoral area. Because the point here is to get people to divert garbage into recycling and organics. And I don't necessarily trust that it's happening to the degree that it should when we rely on people to do it for themselves, when all they've done since then is just throw it all in the garbage anyway. So I think if we don't do Three Stream, like force that to happen, and I know it's an election time, so we're not going to do that, then using price is the only incentive that we have to get people to seek out the lower costs by lowering the amount of garbage that they're creating and putting it in garbage recycling and organics. So I disagree entirely with the idea that the city is being subsidized. They're getting a break because they're already doing some of the work that we're expecting either private companies to do or residents within the electoral areas to do. And I'm not certain that that's guaranteed, and you can't really rely on that. So that's where I'm at. I don't know what Director Means is going to say, but I'll stop. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Director Minions, with your forced hand up.
Thank you. I just want to, really echo Director Jack, and I don't need to add much more. I think Jenny has said it perfectly, and Director Jack following up. I understand that this is a hard shift, and I can understand the perception that it may feel in some ways like the regional areas are subsidizing it, but I certainly don't agree. The only thing that I think is really important to add is when I started as a city councillor, I remember seeing a chart at UBCM that showed the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional District as having the worst waste diversion in the province. That is an atrocious ranking to have, and I think we should all be very embarrassed that that's where we were. We've come a long way, and it's been largely due to the ACRD staff and the work of the city residents at this point. I think the regional areas have a long way to come. I understand it's different and it will take a long time to get there, but this is how we get there. So it's not time to penalize the residents that are doing the work that we need to do. I know that's tough, but this is where we're at. We're moving in the right direction. We need to keep going. Thank you.
So my comment on this is around the organics, the self-hauled organics. I think it's counterproductive to be charging in those areas that we may not have charged before for organics. I think we need to build a level of process and habit of people taking the organics to the landfill and reducing the amount that actually ends up in the waste stream. So I think that really needs to be revisited, that we need to be proactive on that and look for ways to increase the self-haul portion by the rural areas. Many of the rural areas properties are and have been and will be composting. So, that may take some time to actually recognize that that's happening. But until then, until we can actually say, okay, well, it's not happening and we need to do this, then I think we need to kind of revisit that figure. Thank you.
To the chair, we can modify that in two ways. One is that we can keep the minimum $5 charge, but only use it for weighted organics coming in, again, to address our weights and measurement issue. And maybe just add in a resolution that we continue to, because basically we're not charging for people who bring in the tiny 20-liter container of organics. It's not like a commercial hauler coming in or something like that. So we can continue to not charge for those as they get tipped. And then again, we are planning to bring back a fulsome discussion about those self-haul fees. That was not the intention generally with this bylaw update. So we can address it in that way, or we can simply leave the minimum fee off for now, and then just address that when we come back to the ABB to talk about self-haul in that discussion. Those are two options to address that.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing that up, because that is comments that I've heard from members of my community is that they're being hit with the 2-bag minimum. They said, why should we take our garbage, separate our garbage when we're being charged for the landfill anyways? I don't agree with the sentiment there. I think you really need to still, separate the garbage, and most people did and do. So, all due respect, I disagree that rural areas are not doing the 3-stream, because they are. There is for branches and that debris, there is free self-haul to within the city. So I know people are passing by the landfill, they'll drop off their garbage and then drive into town so that they can take their what? Branches, yes. to a free facility. So adding another $5 for organics, I think, is counterproductive at this time anyways. Thanks.
Okay. Somebody like Bob want to make a motion? Bob doesn't want to make a motion. Director Jack.
Yeah, before I move anything, I'm wondering if it would be possible to get a report later on figuring out if we can create kind of free tipping for organics around the times when people do their yard work and that sort of thing. That might be a good way to compromise at that point. So with that, I will move that the Alberni Valley Bamfield Services Committee and Bamfield Services Committee recommend that the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors adopt bylaw R1029-5, Alberni Valley Tipping Fee and Regulation Amendment 2022.
And seconder, Director Rebecca. Okay, on that motion, any further discussion? So this is moving the tipping fee from 130 to 140, similar to the other jurisdictions. The one question I have, Jenny, is there going to be a point where we have an economy of scale and that the cost of actually doing the landfill is going to be reduced because of the volumes?
That's the big question about zero waste. So when you get down to minute amounts, are you able to recover all of your costs to operate through the waste fees? And we're not near there, so we don't need to have that discussion yet. But what landfills that are, or areas that are very effective in reducing, end up having to shift the cost to taxation because they can't recover the total cost for operating the landfill itself out of those fees. Luckily, we're not there yet. That's probably a conversation for about 10 years. Well, let's hope that's a soon conversation. The sooner we're having that conversation, the more successful we've been. But I don't foresee that for a few years.
Okay. Anybody else on the motion? All in favor? And opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, so motion 2.
I can just read it out if that's okay, Mr. Chair. That the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Services Committee recommend that the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District Board of Directors approve, in principle, an amendment to the Memorandum of Understanding with the City of Port Alberni for the 3-stream curbside collection program to reduce the recovery of transportation costs by $1,700 per month to recognize the CPA's success in significantly reducing curbside garbage.
The seconder, sorry. Director Rebecca. Okay, any further discussion on this item? So do we need to discuss weighted vote as financial?
There's no way to vote at committee level, only at board level.
All right, sorry. My bad. Okay, on the motion, all those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4. And opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, moving right along at work speed. We have the BC Transit 3-year expansion initiative. So is that Eddie? I see his face jumping up there.
Yes, Chair, it will be me. Thank you very much. So we have the BC Transit 3-year expansion initiative MOU for 2023-24 and 2024-25 here. BC Transit is recommending an expansion of the custom transit system due to the aforementioned increase to the ridership levels back close to pre-COVID levels and in some cases surpassing. So they're recommending an increase by 1,300 annual hours in 2023-24 to support additional trips during peak service hours and then a 250 annual an hour increase in 24-25 to introduce a base level of Saturday service. So as discussed, ridership has been increasing. The first quarter of 2022-23 saw 4,005 trips delivered. Unfortunately, along with that came 63 unmet trips in the first quarter. Unmet trips in BC Transit and in the transit industry are seen as the one of the most important indicators of the system's capacity to meet the demand. So the definition currently of an unmet trip is a trip that's requested during service hours and within the minimum booking window that cannot be scheduled within an hour before or after the desired time. And that within an hour is kind of the important portion there. So this trip would be an increase of approximately 5 hours per service day. It would necessitate an additional vehicle or 2 vehicles to the fleet, and that is listed there in the financial costs for the increase. We are currently having discussions with BC Transit on whether or not that second vehicle would actually be necessitated. BC Transit's spare ratio is a little bit different for custom transit systems as compared to conventional. So I do believe it will just be a 1 vehicle increase, but we felt it safe to bring it with the additional vehicle because costs will only be lower from what was forecasted. So with that increase, full year annual costs for the 2 vehicles and 1,300 service hours is approximately $57,330. And of course, these are high level estimates that could change closer to implementation. It is expected the implementation date, if approved, would be September of 2023, which would allow for the procurement of vehicles, which is taking a little bit longer these days. And then when we look at the implementation of basic Saturday service with a bus and a driver, we're looking at annual costs of approximately $6,300. In past expansion initiatives, it was discussed about implementing Saturday service with through an increase to the taxi supplement budget only. And you know, as we look at our taxi fleet here and the amount of accessible vehicles, there are just concerns about expanding only via taxi supplement. I think taxi supplement is a great support to the system, but should not be used as the primary source of delivering rides. So that we looked at introducing with a bus and a driver instead. So I think kind of one thing to flag that should the ACRD sign off on the MOU, and then as we move towards budget time, if it's decided for whatever reason that we don't want to move forward with the expansion, we do have the option to back out at that time. The only kind of caveat, as I flagged in the report, was that if the vehicles had already been procured, we could still be on the hook for the lease fees for 1 year. In talking with BC Transit, that's low risk because especially light duty vehicles for custom transit, they are a high demand around the province. So it would be very easy to kind of redistribute those vehicles within the system. When we look down to options considered, and I think this was kind of flagged 3 options. So let's proceed with the expansion as recommended by BC Transit for 23-24. Or option number 2 is, which I think is a potential, is to look to reverse the initiatives as recommended. This would allow us to implement Saturday service immediately and kind of give us a larger sample size of ridership data and unmet trip data while making this decision. Of course, the risk is that if the current trend continues with the number of unmet trips and we continue to see those capacity constraints in the system, it will take us longer to react, especially with how long it will take to procure buses. So there is a significant risk in delaying it. And then of course we have option 3, which is don't recommend any expansions for the fiscal years and use this time to ensure that ridership levels continue to grow. So I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions? Coach.
Thank you. Thank you for this. Through the chair, so Director McNabb was mentioning earlier that about smaller buses and other identifying issues with larger buses and tires and whatnot. The buses that we're looking at, would they be smaller buses, or do we get to see a design at all? Thank you.
Yes, through the chair. They would be the same size light duty bus. So I believe it's a 27-foot. Currently, they would be very similar to kind of what is currently used within the system. I know there have been some changes to the style of bus and the chassis used. And yes, we could provide a design of the bus being procured.
So seeing nobody else up there, one of my concerns is around contractor efficiency. We raised the level of service a couple of years ago, and then we ran into COVID. They were extremely slow at adjusting anything to do with the rates or the amount that we were paying during COVID. And I mean, basically the service almost went down to zero. And, you know, now that we've got a recovery, we're actually seeing what we estimated in the first place, that we went out, we got more buses, we got more time, and significantly more time. And I'm wondering if that calculation has kind of been thought about, what we originally planned for and what we are at this point in time. And I agree with you with regards to the taxi input. The other day I was in the bank and there was a young gal there that had special needs, had been waiting for over a half an hour for a taxi. And that's in Central Port Alberni. I think that's ridiculous. It's, you know, to try to get the taxi service, who already seems to be overloaded, undersupplied, to be part of this picture on an ongoing basis and expect them to be there. We don't want special needs people waiting on the side of the street for 3/4 of an hour to get picked up. So I think that we're duty bound to do something with regards to that. And I like the idea of the Saturday service, you know, for these people that do not have the type of transportation that we require in their home, you know, that they need wheelchair assistance or whatever, shouldn't be restricted to a 5-day week. So anyhow, that's my story. I don't know if you got anything to add to that.
Yeah, Director, I think when we look at contractor efficiency and we kind of look at where the custom transit system is, a big thing to note is the number of subscription trips within the system, so subscription trips are also called repeater trips, right? The same day, same time, same place, kind of continually happening. Like every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, I'm getting dropped off or picked up at for Park Village type thing. BC Transit recommends kind of those subscription trips within a system to be between 50 and 60% for optimal efficiency and to ensure you have the ability for users of the system to kind of have on-demand type rides. We're currently at a 70% subscription rate within the system. So it kind of speaks to, you know, and I know in 2019, we had that expansion and we increased the length of day. So I know we had some issues with kind of some of those afternoon day program rides running into the end of the window for the service day. So we extended the service day by, I believe it was an hour in the afternoon. Now, kind of what we're looking at is we have 3 buses on the road during peak times. This would allow us to have another bus on the road during those peak times, whether it's 2 hours in the AM, 3 hours in the PM, you'd have another bus able to kind of be on the road and would really help with the unmet trip problem. It really would. I know when we talk about the contractor, we do have new dispatch software in there as well, which is also kind of increasing that efficiency in placing rides and ensuring that users of the system are getting the trips they're requiring as best they can. But they are somewhat hamstrung with the resources they have.
Okay, anybody else? Director Cote?
Thank you. Once again, I'd like to know what the ridership is for Sprout Lake. If you could provide those numbers. And I would make the recommendation that the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Committee receive the annual performance summary for information.
Director Jacques. Anything else on that? All in favor? Carried. And
Want me to do the second one?
Sure.
That the Alberni Valley and Bamfield Committee recommend that the ACRD Board of Directors confirm that BC Transit 3-year expansion initiatives 2023 to 2024 to 2025-26 for the Alberni Claycott Custom Transit System and sign the MOU with the BC Transit dated August 23rd, 2022.
and seconder? Director Botner. Anything else on that? The one thing I'd like to look at, just staff to look at, is the taxi part of this, and to make sure that it's the ratio is correct and that it's being used to the best advantage. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving along, we have a report. City Sort and Go report.
Thank you,
Go ahead,
Chair.
ma'am.
I'll just keep it brief. Next week will mark the 1-year anniversary for the City of Port Alberni's 3-stream program. And this is really a shout out to staff and to all the residents. This is a successful program. We've looked at other organizations who have implemented this, and there's definitely challenges that people face. We've run into our own, but what we are seeing is very low contamination. We have seen an increase in recycling, which is excellent. And the garbage has just dramatically dropped. So this is something that I think we need to continue to celebrate, continue to work towards too, because this isn't a program that just runs on its own and is hands-free. So we need to continue to educate people. We have our solid waste team, and they are diligently always working to see where are our issues. We get these lovely audits that show us, in a little pitch here for education, do not put glass in your curbside cart. That's one of our ones. Books, unfortunately, are not allowed in your curbside cart. Those can go to the depot. Increasing information about that. So, and as I mentioned earlier in the agenda, not only are we seeing the food waste getting diverted that used to go into the carts, we are seeing quite a large volume of outdoor yard waste that wasn't being collected by a curbside program now coming into the system. That's all getting turned into great high quality compost that's going to get used in the community. And we really are moving towards meeting our objectives of the solid waste management plan. So this is an excellent report. And I think there's a really good graphic at the end, which is helpful. It shows that shift of where we were and where we're going within the city boundaries. And we're excited that we're going to be launching on the West Coast this next stage, and then working with the smaller communities, electoral areas, Bamfield, as stage 3. So it just keeps rolling forward, and it really is a great program. Happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
So as the resident old guy user of this system, I'd like to suggest that an optional smaller container for organics be made available like the garbage container. I mean, at my age, that container, the green container, is heavy. If you've got a sloped driveway, I'm thinking, okay, what's this going to be like in the snow? So for the amount of organics that traditionally are in the average household, the smaller container would be adequate. I realize that it's not adequate when it comes to yard cleaning and other things like that, maybe putting grass clippings in, but it is for the regular weekly round. So the option to maybe keep the large container and have a small container should be out there so that people actually use it. Because I see in my neighborhood, they don't tend to put the organic container out every pickup.
Excellent question. So there is a system for this, and we'll send you the link. I'll make sure that Jody follows up. So any city resident who would like a smaller container, so the default that everyone has is the 240, you can shift to a 120, which would be, well, a lot of people have 120-liter garbage cans, but essentially it's half size. You need to call the city and make a request. There is a fee to switch out your cart. So you need to be cognizant of that. And unfortunately, because of COVID and delays, even if you make that call today, you will be put on a wait list until we actually receive smaller carts, because there are no small carts in North America at the moment. So yes, you can do that. And as soon as those carts are available, the city has an order. They've been waiting patiently for, I think, almost a year now. Then you will be switched out.
So I think I'll just put it a winch. So on this report, motion to receive the report. If we don't have any further comments, is further comments? No, Director Shannon to receive. Somebody else? Director Cote. I can just say Director Cote, nobody knows. Okay, all in favor? Anybody opposed? Carried. And now we have a, nope, that's it. So any late business? No? Nope. Any questions from question people?
Mr. Chair, there are no questions or comments from the public respecting the meeting today.
There you go. We're all good. So a motion to adjourn. Sorry, this meeting took longer than my average John McNabb chair of the meeting. Director Cote and Director Bodner, all in favor? Carried. We're off. So the next meeting.